The first message arrived at 10:14 p.m. Eduardo was almost asleep on the sofa, with the television on mute and the room lit only by the lamp. The phone vibrating in the dark made him open his eyes too quickly, as if someone had called his name. Unknown number. No previous messages. Nothing indicated who was on the other side. Just one line. Don't go out tomorrow. Eduardo read it twice. It was too direct to be spam, too personal to be mistaken. It's too unsettling to ignore. But he ignored it. It was deleted. He left his cell phone face down and tried to go back to sleep. He couldn't. The phrase stuck in my chest, as if someone had blown it too close to their ear. The next day, at 7 in the morning, a loud noise echoed throughout the entire street. Brakes, metal twisting, glass breaking. Eduardo ran to the window. 3 cars crashed. One of them spun around until it stopped exactly where it normally passed. At 7:05 a.m., he stared at the scene for too long, enough to make it seem like he was expecting something, or someone. He tried to convince himself that it had nothing to do with the message, but he didn't believe it completely. That night, at 10:14 p.m. again, the cell phone vibrated. The light from the screen cut through the dark room. New message from the same number. Avoid the corner today. Eduardo gave a humorless smile. It was impossible not to connect one thing to the other, but it's also impossible to accept that there was any logic to it. He didn't answer. She just put her cell phone aside. At 8:30 p.m. he heard the sirens. The whole street heard. A robbery at the corner grocery store. A customer was injured at the exact time he always passed by. To buy coffee. He stood there motionless, trying to understand what was happening. The feeling was not one of fear. Not yet. It was the feeling that something was watching. Silent. Precise. Attentive. The third message arrived at 3 in the morning. Eduardo woke up without knowing why. She opened her eyes and saw the room lit only by the screen of her cell phone. The unknown number. The same coldness in the text. You're going to lose something important tomorrow. He sat down. Irregular breathing. The room was too quiet. He tried to reply. Who are you? The transmission failed immediately. He appeared. Non-existent number. He looked at those words, for longer than I would like. Because the number might not exist, but the messages were there, and they were always right. The next day, his key disappeared. It simply vanished. He turned the whole house upside down. Nothing. At 11 p.m., the cell phone vibrated. I warned you. Eduardo felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't panic. It wasn't denial. It was something between the two of them. After that, the messages started to become more frequent. Short stories. You need it. Always at the right time. Don't answer now. Soon after, the landline rang. 3 times. And it stopped. Times. He's back. Minutes later, he heard a fight at the end of the street. Shouting. Things falling. Wait 5 minutes. He waited. And as he went down to the building, he saw 2 neighbors arguing. Right at the elevator door. Small things. Common things. But in sequence, they formed something much bigger. It seemed like someone was watching his day, with a few minutes, or hours, in advance, and trying to guide him through that future. Eduardo began to obey without realizing it, first out of curiosity, then as a precaution, and in the end, out of fear of ignoring it. One night, a different message arrived, a phrase that seemed to look right through him. You're not alone out there. He stood still in the middle of the room. The lights were off, a silence deeper than usual. He looked down the hallway, for the kitchen. Back, nothing. The phone vibrated again. Behind the door. The hallway door was ajar, a tiny crack as if it had opened on its own by millimeters. Eduardo swore he had closed it before going to sleep. When he pushed slowly, he didn't see anyone. But the atmosphere there was different. It's colder, denser, a coldness that didn't come from temperature, but with presence. From that night on, the oddities ceased to be coincidences. It was just details, tiny, almost imperceptible, but constant. Delayed shadows on the ground, reflexes slightly out of sync, a bathroom mirror that looked like unfavorable, as if he didn't like to reproduce what he saw. And sometimes, as he passed by the hallway window, he had the feeling that his reflection was looking at him. A second earlier, it wasn't something I could prove, but it was something I could feel, and feeling it was worse. One night the message said, 10:14 p.m., go to the mirror. Eduardo felt the weight of every word, but it was. The living room mirror reflected a version of him, which seemed too normal, too still, as if he were waiting for instructions. He blinked. The reflex blinked a second later. He turned his head. The reflex hesitated as if she were deciding whether to go with him. Until the reflection, he smiled. A slow smile. Small, and completely devoid of emotion. Eduardo did not smile. The cell phone vibrated. You see, he took a step back, without realizing that he was already doing it. Eduardo stared at his own reflection in the mirror, but the feeling was that it wasn't him who was being watched. It was the mirror that was observing. The reflection kept the smile slight, a smile that seemed to know something which he didn't know yet. He slowly raised his hand, such as for testing a hypothesis. The reflection also lifted, but not immediately. There was a short pause, an almost imperceptible delay, enough to create a doubt, enough to seem intentional. His cell phone vibrated in his hand. Get out of the mirror. Eduardo took 2 quick steps back as if it had been pulled backward. The screen illuminated his chest. The whole house was silent. Then another message came. Don't come back yet. He looked away from the mirror, trying not to notice any more strange details. No movement out of place. But something was already wrong. Completely wrong. That night he slept on the sofa, with the lights in the room on and the television was tuned to the weather channel. I am here. Just light. The cell phone remained face down, as if one could stop it from vibrating. The next day, Eduardo tried to continue with his routine. Drink coffee, to have a bath, check the time, but everything seemed out of place, as if I were living half a second behind the rest of the world. In the elevator, the mirror looked a little too dark. At the building's entrance, the glass reflected the street before reflecting him. And while he was walking, he felt something strange, as if someone were walking behind, imitating his breathing. When he turned around to check, there was nobody there. Even so, it was impossible to deny the feeling of being accompanied. At 2:12 p.m., the cell phone vibrated. Times for home. Nothing more. Without explanation, for no apparent reason. Eduardo stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. He looked around. People went about their lives as normal. Cars passing by. The sound of children playing. A woman talking on the phone. Nothing seemed to justify the warning. But he came back. Upon arriving home, he heard a loud bang in the distance. Later I found out, from the gossipy neighbor, that a building slab had come loose 2 blocks ahead. No one was injured, but if he had kept walking, he felt his body go cold. The message wasn't about what happened. It was about what could have happened. And that was worse. At 10:14 p.m. that night, the phone vibrated even before it turned on. He seemed anxious. He seemed alive. The sentence was short. Don't open the door today. Eduardo froze. He hadn't heard anything. No movement in the hallway. Nothing. Just a heads up. Minutes later, someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks. Spaced out. Firms. He stood motionless, breathing slowly, trying to control the silent panic. The phone vibrated again. It's not for you. His breathing became shorter, heavier. The knocking continued, this time stronger. Then they stopped completely. When he looked through the peephole, there was nobody there. That night, he realized something else. The reflection in the bedroom window. I wasn't in the same position as him. He was sitting on the bed, but the reflection appeared to be standing, slightly leaning forward, as if he were watching him sleep. Eduardo stood up slowly. He went to the window. He pressed his face against the glass. The reflection stared back at him. Property. He retreated. He blinked. He looked again. Now the reflexes were synchronized. Perfect. Normal. But the discomfort remained. And then, the warnings changed tone. You're confusing memories. He read the sentence 3 times. Then she read it in a low voice. It didn't make sense. The cell phone vibrated. This has happened before. Eduardo was breathless for a few seconds. It was too intimate a feeling, as if someone were reading files inside his head. He spent the day trying to ignore it, but the phrase wouldn't leave my mind. This has happened before. Before when? In another dream? In another life? Or never? At 6:40 p.m., while washing a glass, he heard the refrigerator door slam shut by itself, slowly, as if someone had pushed it with their fingertips. Eduardo dropped the sponge. He stood still, listening to the silence. A drop trickled down the glass. The noise seemed too loud, too intrusive. He felt a shiver run down the back of his neck. The cell phone vibrated. Don't turn around. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He tried not to imagine anything behind him. New vibe. He's leaving. Eduardo stood motionless. He counted to 5, up to 10, up to 15. She opened her eyes slowly. The refrigerator light was on. The door was ajar, as if it were breathing. He closed it carefully, without making a sound. It wasn't until 10:14 p.m. that the strangest message arrived. "Tomorrow you will understand." Eduardo read in silence. He stood still, the heart beating in the neck. He asked, "Understand what?" The cell phone blinked, as if he were writing something, and then it appeared, "What you tried to forget." He dropped his cell phone on the table. The whole house seemed to shrink. The silent walls, the dark mirror, the refrigerator is closed, but still, present. He sat down on the floor, as if the body had temporarily given up. He took a deep breath, but breathing didn't help, and it was as if the house, for the first time, had breathed along with it. Eduardo spent the next day trying to act normally, trying not to look like I was expecting something, but it was. The messages always came in advance, always before he understood the reason. And that last sentence, "What you tried to forget," it wouldn't leave my head. He didn't remember forgetting anything, but the feeling of absence was still there, like a hole in the ground that you only notice when you're about to fall in. At 10:10 p.m. the cell phone was on the table, upside down, but Eduardo knew he would be thrilled. He knew the exact moment. I knew something was about to happen. At 10:14 p.m., the doorbell rang. Just once. Eduardo stood still. The sound seemed to travel through my entire body, as if the knocking hadn't come from the door, but from within him. The room was silent. The whole house seemed to be waiting for his reaction. The cell phone vibrated. Abra. He didn't want to, but it opened. The hallway was empty, calm, neutral, but as soon as he closed the door, he heard something behind him. No steps, no voice, just movement. He turned slowly. The mirror in the room was dark again. Not completely black, but as if reflecting a room where the light was dimmer, where everything was a little further away, and his reflection wasn't aligned. It was closer, one step ahead of the actual position, as if he had approached while his back was turned. Eduardo didn't move, but the reflex took a half step, too small to seem offensive, big enough to look real. His cell phone vibrated in his hand. That's where you were. He didn't understand, or he understood too late. Another message has arrived. You just came back too soon. Eduardo felt his legs give way. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact. As if all of that, the messages, delays in reflexes, the cold at the doors, accurate warnings, if it were simply the simplest way to communicate a single thing, he wasn't seeing the future. I was seeing someone who had been there before, someone who knew what would happen, because it had already happened. Not another one, not an entity. It was him, or the part of it that got stuck, regardless of what had happened before all of this began. The reflection pressed its hand against the glass. The reflected room became darker, deeper. The phone vibrated for the last time. Times. And before Eduardo could even breathe, the light in the room flickered, and the reflection disappeared. It didn't happen. He didn't cross. It made no noise. It simply stopped being there. And the image in the mirror began to reflect only the empty room behind him, but not exactly as she was. There was one detail, small, almost imperceptible. Eduardo wasn't thinking. His cell phone fell from his hand. The lit screen displayed the same thing that all the messages had shown from the beginning, something he would only understand too late.